In this episode of the Military Mindset for Business podcast, I'm chatting with Glen and Rowena Ferrarotto. Now, super cool story. First of all, as a Ramey guy myself, I just love Glen's sharing the stories of changing gearbox and swinging spanners in the middle of the battle in Afghanistan. But we also talk about, their relationship. We talk about how they managed to go through 10 years of a military career and supporting each other during multiple operations. But the story doesn't end there. It's about fantastic enterprise and entrepreneurship, the creation of Ironside Resources, a multi-award winning company providing recruitment services for veterans. And ultimately, Glen, not just a corporal, getting to one of the highest seats within the Department of Veteran Affairs in Australia, which is the Repatriation Commissioner. So we unpack Rowie and Glen's journey through a career of service. Stay tuned. Welcome to this episode of the Military Mindset for Business podcast. My name's Pete Liston. Super excited today to chat with Ro and Glen Ferrarotto. Hey, Glen. Hey, Ro.
Hi, mate. How you doing, Pete?
Good. Fantastic. So I came across Glen coming up nearly eight years or so ago when we both won a little trinket down at Parliament House many years ago. But I've been watching, with real interest about, Glen and Ro, not only on their business paths, but as they move in and out of business, in and out of entrepreneurship. And so really excited to share their mutual story today, talk about Ironside and the business. But let's kick off way back at the start. And if I can go to Glen first, mate, where did you grow up and what made you want to join the Army?
Wow. Well, so we're going all the way back. All right. So, Pete, thanks for having us, mate. We
Pleasure.
appreciate it. We've been watching you too, just quietly, mate, and we like what you do, and we love the community that you've established in the BBC.
Nailed it,
I'm not
mate.
going
Nailed it.
to get veteran business community, mates, as we now call it. So good on you, mate, and everyone that's part of it. Look, so I grew up in Greensborough, down here in Melbourne. At the time, Greensborough was known as out in the sticks, but it was only ever 45 odd minutes from the CBD. Northeastern suburbs. Went to primary school in the same location. Went to secondary school in the city. My mum was a teacher at a private school, and I ended up going to a school next door to the all girls school. I went to an all boys school, Trinity Grammar, and had a ride in a Datsun Stanza to and from school for 7 years throughout my senior school education. While all the other kids were getting rides in Mercedes and Volvos and other luxury cars, the old Datsun Stanza was as good as it got out in Greensboro,
Nothing
mate.
wrong with the Dado, mate. Nothing wrong with the
And I wish I
Dado.
still had it. I actually bought it as my first car or second car. And when I initially joined the army, that car did countless numbers of journeys up the Hume Highway from Melbourne up to
Yeah.
Albury, to Latchford Barracks.
No silver spoon here, mate. My first car was a Mitsubishi Sigma. And what I loved about it is it actually had twin front headlights. And I used to think it looked a little bit like a BMW, but it actually
Yeah.
wasn't. It actually wasn't, mate. Mitsubishi
But
Sigma is
anyway,
just a
it's fun. They were the heaviest cars on the road. My sister had one of them, no power steering.
no power
Uh,
steering.
Remember, my old man put replaced the roof with a butterfly sort of carpet on the roof of the thing, and it was the most horrific car, full of rust, heavy as you can imagine, but somewhat reliable. So yeah, and there we go.
And so, Army, what made you
Yeah.
actually jump over there?
Um, Look, I just had this want to serve when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So my old man was a national serviceman. Both my grandfathers served. I always had this, I don't know, just this draw towards service and what it meant and
Mm.
sacrifice. And I think, sacrifice always played a big part in my life. And I know that my parents both sacrificed immensely to send myself and my sister to private schools, and so did Rowie's mum in particular. And I saw service as a pure form of sacrifice, I guess. And
Yeah.
so, look, it was always there. I did air training corps for
Yeah.
4 or 5 years as a kid. So no army cadets for me. It was all air cadets, and but all of the lads that I bumped around with at air cadets, we all ended up joining the army. None of us joined the air force. We all loved the army side of air cadets, and the drill and the discipline and all that sort of stuff. And so look, throughout school, I tried a different, a whole range of entry points to the ADF. Initially, I think in year 11, I had a crack at an ADFA scholarship. I think that was the first time I had a crack to try and get to ADFA. Year 11, I think, that sort of led your journey through year 12, and then you'd go. I wasn't successful. I tried again in year 12. I wasn't successful. I tried for general enlistment officer entry in year 12. I wasn't successful. I kept failing the aptitude test, Pete.
Mm.
And it was, it would shit me to tears, to be quite honest. It was what I wanted to do. I mean, I grew up also wanting to be a pilot like everyone else, a fighter pilot or a fast jet pilot. And so I learned quickly throughout my senior years in school that wasn't going to happen. And so, I turned my attention to army and everything about it. And so eventually I got through the door as a general enlisted soldier, and they offered look, I can't recall all the different skill sets that I was offered. A trade was one of them as a diesel mechanic, and I think my dad just said, "Well, if you're going to join the army, you might as well get a trade." So that's what I did. Yeah,
And then went to God's Call Ramey, mate. Ade Mate.
mate, Ade Amade, loved it. Still, my closest mates to this day are the boys that I lived with at Latchford Barracks. We all grew up together. We were 18, 19 years old. We were getting paid $21,000 a year. We were spending all of that money on modifying our cars, and we had an absolute ball of a time at Latchford Barracks. Over to the Weir on the weekends during summer, skiing and camping and just having an absolute cracker of a time. But the trade was always secondary, and but we all ended up with a trade certificate at the end of it, which was wonderful.
And when you're a young fella and you don't have to pay rent, you don't have to pay for food, 21 grand serious coin, plenty of money to play with.
Big biggies. And we were rich.
You did have to pay for food at Latchford, didn't you?
No,
Having meals in the mess.
yeah, no, we'd all eat at the mess. No, it was all just we free.
Just remember that dodgy microwave in the shared space.
Oh yeah, we all had our, we had a microwave, we had fridges and other bits and pieces in our living areas. But yeah, no, the mess was wonderful. One of my closest mates still ended up marrying one of the chefs at the mess at the time.
That's
I
right.
won't mention any names. And it was a love affair that started at Latford, and it ended up producing 3 or 4 kids, and the rest is history. So yeah.
I want to jump across to Ro for a sec. Ro, you around at this time, are you? When did you guys meet?
Yeah. Well, actually, it's probably our shared love of old Datsuns. No, not really. I learned to drive in a 120Y around the same time. We probably actually first bumped into each other. We were the kids from the burbs who went to the Q schools in Melbourne. So the journey home was always the place where you sort of sidled up to whoever you thought was a bit cute. And yeah, we met on a bus probably when we were about 15 or 16.
Yeah.
And then also reinforced by Glen driving through McDonald's drive-through after air cadets every Tuesday night and checking me out in the drive-through window. So,
well, I actually didn't realize you guys were like high school sweeties, like that far back.
Yeah, it did go that far back. There were a couple of party pashes at high school, what they call formals.
Spot partners once.
Yeah.
I went with another
too much
girl, and Rowie went with another bloke. High five halfway through.
So this is interesting because this, you're not only intimate, but you've been there since the start of this whole military journey as well, right? So you've seen everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
So we got together when Glen was at Latchford. So, I think it was the end of my second year of uni.
Yeah.
We met over summer when he came down to Melbourne. Well, we actually got together then, and through our mutual mates. Through McDonald's, Air Force cadets in school, all of them. And I think it was Moomba.
So, Ro, when did you move up? When did you move up to Latchford?
Yeah, we did the long distance thing, Melbourne to Albury for the last year of my uni degree, and the last year of Glen's time at Latchford, and then he got posted to Brisbane. So at the end of my uni time, I went up there for summer holidays just to check it out and hang out with him for a bit. And we kind of made the decision.
Yeah, we packed up Roey's Ford Laser, mate, and drove it from Melbourne to Brisbane. And
the rest is history.
Mind you, Mrs. Holland was devastated that Roey had fallen in love with an enlisted man, Pete, not an officer, and so I had to work my way through those early years and build a level of respect and rapport. But to Bev's credit, she realised that Ramey actually is God's call, and even the soldiers are officers at heart, mate. So
yeah, amen.
Probably 19 or 20, 21, we got together. That was it. Yeah.
So where's your first posting up in Brizzy?
7 CSSB. That was after I did, I guess, 12 months of on-job training at Balimba at
Brizzy Airport there?
Say again?
Is that Brizzy Airport?
Yeah, no, it was on the Brisbane River. Beautiful old base, but it's all sold off now to real estate. I think that happened maybe 10 or 15 years ago. But yeah, so I did 12 months on-job training at Balimba. A lot of good fun and good times there too. And then off to 7 CSSB was my first posting.
Excuse me there. If I can ask, when did you guys have your first kids? Long time or short time?
Long time after that.
Yeah, we were together 10 years before we had kids. So we got married in Darwin in 2005. We just celebrated our 20-year wedding anniversary, so that's the numbers are all top of mind.
Yeah.
So when Glen was serving in Darwin, we got married up there. Beautiful time and place to do that with all our mates around us and family come up. And then we had kids after Glen got out of the army. So we got locked down in Melbourne.
So 10 years as a couple, as like no parents.
Yeah.
But what my mind automatically thinks of here is now the deployments and the trips away and the time away. Can you give us an overview, Glen, of the trips that you did?
Yeah, of course. So 97 through to what? About say 2003 or thereabouts. There wasn't a lot going on. I mean, obviously Timor sort of started when Timor started 01 or thereabouts or something like that. 99, sorry, 99 I should say. Yeah. So Timor was sort of developing. I was never in the right catchment to deploy to Timor other than once at 7 CSSB, and there'll be potentially blokes that listen to this that might have been through the same thing. We had our bags packed and spray painted with triangles at one point, ready to get on a plane, and then they decided not to take mechanics, so we all stayed at home, and everyone else went, and then I went up to Darwin to 5-7 area. Not a lot happening at the time. It was a great couple of years in Darwin. Iraq sort of was on and off. I got a rifle company Butterworth trip, Pete. Yep. That was bloody fantastic. The companies needed a section commander. They were down a section commander and came to the workshops and said, is anyone interested? And I stuck my hand up straight away, and I went off grunting for about 6 months. We did Tully and then up to Malaysia. Loved that. It was an interesting journey home. We heard whilst we were over in Malaysia that 5-7 was going to go over to AMTG2, and we were told by our OC and ASM at the time, we being 3 or 4 of us from the workshop, including myself, that went over to Malaysia, that if we volunteered for this, lads, you'd be the first on the list to deploy to Iraq if we go. You wouldn't be surprised, Pete, to learn that when we got home, everyone was in desert camps and we were on the reserve list, right? So, another one of those moments. Two of the guys maybe ended up going over to Iraq. I didn't get a ticket. And I was pretty disgruntled, wasn't I, Rowie, at the time? I was a bit over it, mate, to be honest. I was ready to step away from the whole organisation. I'd actually had an application into RMC while I was in Malaysia at RCB. I thought while I was there, I fell in love with army and soldiering, and I wanted to actually core transfer to infantry and go to RMC and be a warfighter effectively. Yeah. That's what I decided I wanted to do, and I was encouraged by the command, by the OC. I was written up by the platoon commanders and adjutant, but being left off that Iraq trip really put a dampener on all of that ambition. And not long after, maybe 2 or 3 months, Schema came to Darwin. Andy Vogler was the Schema rep for Ramey, and he goes, Jesus, Glenn, what are you still doing here? And I said, mate, I don't know, Andy. I'm not sure what I've done wrong.
Yeah.
But he said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, look, I'd love to go into the command, Special Operations Command. I think we all wanted to go west at that point. He said that there was a small unit in Sydney that was established or being established at the time called SOC-C, which is now SOLS. How would you feel about Sydney? And I said, anything but here, let's get it done. And Rowie and I drove down to Sydney. So look, back to deployments, mate, and the original question. Sydney was busy, wasn't it, Rowie? So
yeah.
I'll come back. I'll grab
ahead.
you and we'll talk about the SOT trip or the Special Forces trip in a second. If I can just ask you, Rowie, what are you doing in Darwin at this time? You got a career, you're a businesswoman. What are you doing? Like, it's always this.
Yeah.
Being a partner of a military member has got to be the most challenging thing. And where are you defining your life and your place at the moment?
Yeah, look, really good question. It's universal for everyone who's partnered up with a defence member, right? I was busy planning a wedding. So Glen was in Malaysia. That was just before we got married in June 2005. So there's a lot of all of that sort of, having to catch up with the bridesmaids and do all that sort. So it was really fun. It was a really fun time. It was tough making a lot of decisions on my own, but that's been the rest of our life, really. I'm a decision maker.
Such groundwork.
No, seriously. I was really fortunate. I'd done my degree, so I had that behind me, but I'd also had a bit of admin experience in financial services, which got me my first proper career job in Brisbane when we were posted there with Perpetual Services Trustee Company. And that the connections I made in that role in Brizzy allowed me to make a connection for my first opportunity in Darwin. So I got connected with the National Australia Bank. And ended up working in financial planning, admin in the branch there in Darwin CBD. And I loved it. I loved the people that I worked with. I learned a lot about financial planning. I had been studying in Brisbane. I'd done my first part of my MBA. So I sort of had that appreciation of business and studied my diploma of financial planning. Actually, I started that sort of process in Darwin. So I remember sitting at the little table in our apartment up there in Darwin studying while Glen was busy doing all of his deployments and getting married and all that sort of stuff. I think that was the end of my study career, actually. That's kind of when I finished it all up once we moved to Sydney after that. But I was pretty lucky. I got my foot in the door at NAB, which I ended up having a 13-year career at NAB.
Because it's funny when you have these.
Oh, sorry, Pete.
I was going to say they're all sliding doors moments, like, I'm missing the Iraq trip, volunteering for Butterworth. And we can't see how this sort of patchwork of experiences actually lead and build to where we're going in the future.
Mate, it's so well said, Pete. And, I think I'm not a religious person, but I've always had this thought that everything happens for a reason. And it's really hard at times to understand what that reason is or why things occur. And as you get older and I guess more mature, you're more enabled to contemplate the reasoning behind certain things that are out of your control. But if I look back on all of that, every decision that we made while we were in Brisbane leading to Darwin, the disappointment of Iraq for both of us, really, because there was a financial gain for us as a couple from that. There was so much from my perspective that I lost at the time not going to Iraq, and
all your mates went.
Yeah, and all my mates went. And the bastards even stole my favourite hat and took it with them, and took photos of the bloody thing on statues of Saddam Hussein.
You just love it. You've got good mates when they're taking the piss out of you like that, eh? Just to rub the salt in a little bit deeper.
Absolute assholes, Pete. And
I got in trouble because I was the enabler. The boys came to me and said, "Give us that hat," and I went, "Oh." You can do with it. They said, "Don't worry about it, Robbie. Just hand it over."
You know what the OC said to me, mate? He took me for a walk around the yard because he knew that because I'd actually withdrawn my application to RMC, and he took, so he, put his arm around me, and he said, Glenn, I need you to understand that the reason you're not coming is because you're the only bloke that I can trust to have all of our vehicles ready for our field deployments when we return. And
the classic, we got to leave our best for rear details to look after us. Like, come on.
Punishment became the coin phrase.
Yeah.
But anyway, look, back to what you said, it all led to an opportunity to go down to Sydney, an opportunity to work within Special Operations Command, which ticked so many boxes for me, and then deployments, and then that led to what, ultimately has led to where we are now. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
It's funny, I never really clicked, but I was across the hill at 3 RAR while you would have been at 4 RAR on the other side. And I remember heading over there a couple of times and visiting the TST and like visiting the troop commander and thinking, this is a place where I'd love to be. Were you guys living in Battle Grove at the time, or?
We were living in Matraville.
Yeah, because you got posted to that
east side.
Port Botany.
Yeah, so I was posted to Special Operations Combat Support Services Battalion, which ended up, battalion company, which is now SOLS, which is Special Operations Logistics Squadron, I think. Now, SOC-C at the time was very small, and we were based at the 5 Sisby depot, which was in Banks Meadow.
Yeah, little depot there, not far from the port.
Yeah. So we had a great crew, mate. We
10 minutes from work. We had a house in Maroubra. We went to the beach every weekend.
It was good. We lived,
lattes at cafes. It was awesome.
When I moved us down there, they put us in an apartment, a Quest on Coogee Bay Road.
Yeah, another one.
Stone's throw from the pub. And we were there for 2 weeks, nearly 3 weeks, and it was summertime. And I'm going, stuff on Iraq. I'm living the dream.
I spent my whole career in Sydney, whether it was Holsworthy or Victoria Barracks or Randwick Barracks, and I got a married quarter in the patch out the back of Randwick Barracks there. And man, they dragged me out of there with my fingernails. Yeah. And even when I transitioned out, I actually got a rental property 3 doors down the road from where my army quarter was. The rent went up about 4 times, but that little community, I loved it. Down in the PT on Coogee Beach, it was just the best life. Absolutely.
That's great.
Oh, mate, 100%. Yeah.
We made a new group of friends because it's such a small little unit there that we all just became mates. Went to the pub every Friday and stayed there. Yeah,
we had a ball.
Happy days.
And the unit was good, Pete. It was a good unit at the time. We did a lot of really cool things. It was a different army though. Different command, different army, and off we went. I guess that sort of started our deployment rotations for a couple of years. Yeah.
So you went to Kuwait first, but as a forward operating support team, but you never went to Afghan the first time. Is that right?
Well, no, I ended up going in, and so I was never supposed to. We did an FRT into Kuwait. I think the original timeline was something like a month and a half, 2 months planning. All the SF vehicles at the time were in shipping containers out the back of I don't recall what they used to call the Australian tents, but it was at Ali Al Salim in Kuwait, and Camp something or other with a kangaroo maybe. Anyway, so a group of us went in there, and our job was to pull all the vehicles out of storage, service them, repair, and get them ready for redeployment into Afghanistan. And that included all the weaponry and other bits and pieces. And that was a pretty cool opportunity. We went over there. We worked with all the guys from the West and a few guys from 4 RAR that were floating through at the time. We were really independent of the big army. It was a good time. We got to travel into Kuwait and go into big Bunnings type style warehouses with a credit card and buy equipment to refurbish the workshop over in Tarin Kowt. And we did this numerous times. We all sort of civilian clothes type work, and it was for a Ramey guy, mate. It was really unique, but very rewarding. And so look, towards the end of that trip, I think the intent originally was that the vehicles would go over with a couple of operators, and things would happen from that point. And just prior to, maybe a week or two prior to getting on the plane to come home, I spoke with my ASM, and he said, you're going to go in with the vehicles and you're going to set up the workshop in Tarankout. And so that's what I did. And look, I don't know how long, I can't remember how long I stayed in Afghanistan, maybe a month, maybe a bit longer.
Yep.
It wasn't a rotation, Pete, as such. It was, there wasn't a lot going on for the command at the time in Afghanistan, but Camp Russell needed a lot of work to get it prepared and ready for the rotations to begin again, and that was our job over there.
But you went back on a rotation not long after, yeah?
Yeah, so
what do you mean? Early 07 you did that.
Yeah.
And then went back again.
Not too long after I got home. So yeah, it was really interesting. So the whole time, of course, Rowie was back in Sydney, working with, was it still NAB at the time, or MLC?
NLC, all part of NAB.
Yeah, NAB.
Sydney.
Everything was up in the air. We were living in this sort of bubble of preparedness to deploy constantly. So we were on sort of, I don't know what you want to call them, flyaway teams, whatever you want to call them, and just as loggies, Pete, and we were on short notice, ready to move consistently. It was a
lot of stop starts.
There's a lot going on. Yeah. So in between all of this, I decided that I wanted to go and get myself special forces qualified. So again, it was that sort of soldier in my head that was saying, you need to do more, you need to do more. So prior to that first trip into Kuwait, I completed my SF entry test.
Yep.
And my intent was that I'd go straight onto a commando selection course.
End up with a Green Beret eventually?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to do, right? And I figured the only way I was ever going to get outside the wire and do what I in my mind was doing my job, was to get beret qualified. And at the time it actually was. There wasn't really any other opportunity for RAMI guys to do that. And so I went ahead and did that. I was put onto a course, but I went to Kuwait, so I didn't do that initial CTC. Went into Afghanistan, came back, and the intent was that I'd do the next available CTC, right? So I started training again, overtraining a little bit, ended up in hospital once with heart palpitations because I was taking too much creatine, and nearly killed me, Pete. Yeah, that's something that the boys remind me of occasionally. I literally had a heart attack.
Were you stacked though? Was you stacked, Rowie? You look good?
No, my frame. I wasn't stacked at all. I had nothing on me. I was eating 2 chickens a day to try and put weight on.
Yeah.
But best he's ever been.
The creatine nearly killed me, quite literally. And so then I was walking down the corridor at one point, and I passed the adjutant, and he said, "Glenn, how's your training going?" I said, "Yeah, it's going really well. The course is in about 3 weeks." And he said, "Well, you need to make a decision. You either go back over to Afghanistan with Bravo Company 4 RAR, or you do your commando course." And
taking sliding doors.
Yeah, and shit, that was a tough one. To be quite honest, the thing that made the decision for me, Pete, was that while I was in Afghanistan the previous time, the company sergeant major who was there, a bloke called Rufus, was hell bent on taking mechanics out on vehicle mounted patrols, and he said that come hell or high water, the next rotation that went in, they would be taking RAMI guys out or mechanics out, and so I knew that the opportunity would be there to get outside the wire if I went back. So I came home, had a conversation with Rowie, and I said, I'm going to go back over, and it was quite short turnaround, wasn't it? From memory, it was maybe felt like a month, but it might have been a bit longer. I don't know. Anyway, it was so off I went with Bravo Company on their tour. Yeah.
A quick question on that. Obviously, you got your skill set down as a mechanic, and deliver that job with aplomb anytime you need it. But being part of the team, being part of a small team in combat operations, where were you with your training and skills as a warfighter at this time? Because you're part of a small team outside. That is the first job. Mechanic is the redundancy job.
Yeah, it's a good question, mate. Army learned a lot of lessons in those early years in Afghanistan, but we we hadn't learnt them prior to those early years, obviously, and so there was no lead up training. There was no pre-deployment training. There wasn't even weapon qualification training for Ramey guys. So on the first patrol I did outside the wire with one of the companies, I was carrying a weapon that I wasn't qualified in, full of fruit. I knew how to shoot it. We'd been to the range countless times, and I was competent at using the weapon system. The only weapon around me that I was qualified on was a 50 cal machine gun that was sitting on top of the mothership because I'd been a crew commander up at 5-7 RAR.
Yeah.
But I was sitting behind a Mag 58. I had an M4 with it was an M203 launcher on the front of it.
Yeah.
And so, you talk about your preparedness as a warfighter. Well, I had all my training, but all my training, Pete, was all jungle training, right? Like
I just can't help but think this trip to Malaysia as a infantry seco, really that's classic foundation anyway, just warfighting 101.
Oh, look, I must admit, mate, I couldn't have felt more prepared personally and mentally. I couldn't wait for this opportunity. I prepared myself as best I could, and everything around me that I was responsible for, knowing primarily that my responsibility was to ensure that the vehicles on the patrol were serviceable prior to leaving and remained serviceable whilst we're out in the field. But inevitably, you were going to be asked to be a soldier, and you had to be a soldier the entire time you're on patrol. It wasn't field training, and it was the one point in time that it really hit home, mate, and it continued to occur. But first time it occurred was a real bone shaker. Was when we were lined up to leave the gates of Taran Kaut very early in the morning, as we would on any patrol, and I saw this figure walking towards the back of the convoy where the mothership would generally be, and it was a beautiful sight. A company of commandos gunned up to the shithouse on their SRVs. It was a beautiful thing to see. And there was this guy walking down, and he was waving his hand around like this, and I wasn't sure what he was doing. I didn't even know who he was until he got to our vehicle, and I recognized him as the Padre, and he was blessing all the vehicles and all the crew. And that was a moment, mate, where I just went, it's game time, right? And
out of curiosity, was it John Sanderson?
Geez, I'd love to say it was. I've met John since. I don't know, mate. I've never spoken to him about it.
Interesting. No, John. Funny enough, John was the Padre that married us, me and Kat. I've got a. I know he did a lot of trips with SOTG over the years. I was just curious whether that was whether it was him.
Oh, geez, I don't know, mate. I really don't, to be honest.
So
there you go.
Two things here. Your experiences outside the wire as a soldier versus your experiences outside the wire as a mechanic. First of all, as a mechanic, was there ever anything go wrong with the vehicles that you needed to fix them outside?
Oh, well, constantly, mate. It was constant, and anyone who worked as a mechanic at that time, we were still using SRVs, LRPVs, Polaris motorbikes, and an old Unimog as the mothership, and sometimes we'd have one Bushmaster. Oh, talking about qualifications, I wasn't even qualified on the Bushmaster, Pete.
Yeah.
So I was literally learning.
No cuff too tough, mate. Should work it out. No cuff too tough.
I figured it out eventually, but mate, yeah, I mean, shit would break down all the time, and generally it was because we were too heavy. Everything was overloaded. Mate, from the motorbikes through to the vehicles, through to the people, everything was overloaded. So absolutely, and the first job I had to do, and I think it was my first job anyway. It was a long time ago now, Pete, but a sniper's motorbike broke down in a creek line, and it was still dark. The convoy stopped, and funnily enough, I've learned to hate stopping when I'm driving now, or stopping in general, because every time we stopped, I knew something was wrong. You'd never stop unless you had to. And the mechanic would be called up the front, and you'd always walk in the vehicle tracks. You'd always take your weapon with you, you'd get to the broken down vehicle, you'd make an assessment. This particular motorbike was just clogged up with dust. It was just not breathing. The only thing I could do at the time, and any mechanic's going to cringe when they hear me say this, was just to pull the air filter out of it completely and
smack it on the tire a few times.
Just let the no, mate, I think from memory I just pulled the air filter out and just let the engine just chew the dust, because that was the only way to keep the bloody thing moving for at least a small amount of time until we could get somewhere safe to make a better assessment and do a better job. But that's how we operated. You just, whatever you had to do to keep the convoy moving forward, you did. And then the next time you stopped, whether if you had more opportunity to make a better repair, then you would do that, or you'd assess your repair you made previously and hope that it was still functioning. But yeah, there was constant breakdowns.
I can't help but think, first of all, from the CSM to have the vision of getting a greaser out there in the patrol. But secondly, your job almost never ends. When the infantry, get into their night harbors or secure positions and they start doing their picket rotations, if anything, you're still fixing shit, still getting things ready, getting things prepared.
Yeah. It was like that, mate. Whenever you'd pull up, and if you went into what they used to call them, a vehicle harbour, there's a 3-lettered acronym. The first thing that you'd do is to walk around to every crew, and you'd speak to every crew and ask them if they had any issues with their vehicles, and then you'd assess the priority, and you'd go to work fixing. The crews were wonderful, mate. And these guys, the mechanical aptitude of commandos and special operation warfighters is exceptional, right? So the reality is, Pete, they could have done a lot of the work themselves, but they had their own job to do, and I'll never forget how hard these guys would work in the field.
Yeah.
And we would drive, mate, sometimes all night. Mostly we drive all night, to the point that you'd be, blokes were falling asleep at the wheel. We're wearing the old version night vision goggles on heavy helmets. It was hard work, and you'd get to a warm-up point, and the team or a group from the company would then mount up with their packs. The snipers would walk up a hill with all their kit. They'd take an overwatch position. 2 or 3 cars would go off and do a forward observation on a target or whatever it might have been the next day. Their jobs didn't stop either, mate.
Yeah.
I mean, it was as busy as it could have been for any of us, but we all had our own jobs to do, and it was done really, really well. Couldn't be more proud of working with Australian soldiers, in particular special operations soldiers.
Man, what an experience! Just to I've always felt, I say this regularly, that I'm almost like a fly on the wall. The way that I feel as a log officer, sort of being there, but again, I just have utmost respect, or the reason we do this stuff at the VBC isn't not only for the loggies, but particularly the war fighters that are out there, living the real stories and doing the real hard work. I'm just fascinated by the courage and commitment, and I don't sound too funny, but I just feel like better people than me, man, that they crack on and do this stuff. It's just amazing. I'm just awestruck.
Phenomenal humans, mate. Absolutely. Yeah. And love every single one of them dearly. One of the best, I guess, awakenings for me during that time was I realised that I didn't have to go and get a beret to be accepted as part of the team.
Yeah, that's cool.
And that went to the East Coast lads or the West Coast lads. Yeah. They didn't give a shit, mate. They could not care less whether you had a beret the same colour as theirs, as long as you could do your job and do it well, mate. You were part of the team, and it was so humbling to be part of that organisation.
Bro, if I can ask you, what's it like as a wife of a warfighter? Of a guy that's on deployment in Afghanistan? What's going through your head, and what's your community like back home?
Yeah, it's interesting timing actually, Pete, because tomorrow morning I fly up to Sydney for the first time in a long time, actually, just for leisure. I'm actually going to one of my girlfriend's 50th birthday parties. We've managed to stay really close and connected over the last, when did we leave Sydney? 2008.
Yeah.
So, 15 odd years through her life being really different to mine, because we shared such a...
You're right.
It just brings it all back a little bit. Yeah. It's a really tough time.
So this is the reality of the nation's at war,
Yeah.
and the boys over there doing the real job.
Yeah. I made a really good friend in Danielle, and she sort of recognised where I was at in my life and wrapped her arms around me and said, let's be friends. Let's go and hang out and do stuff. So she lived a pretty high life in Sydney. It was a lot of fun. We went, hung out in Darlinghurst, went down the Opera Bar. Just had a lot of fun. And she was a big part of my life then in helping distract me from the goings on. It wasn't so much Sydney. It was probably more when we got to Melbourne when you went on that bigger deployment. She was always still a really strong foundational support for me in understanding the kind of work that Glen did, understanding who I was and the difficulties of that life. It's kind of a bit lonely from a partner perspective. A lot of the boys you went with were single, I think, at the time, weren't they?
Yeah, it was different, mate. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the guys were young and single, absolutely. And the workshop was kind of thrown together a little bit too, so we weren't really as bonded. We weren't. We weren't a 5-7 hour workshop. We were kind of a little bit sporadic. There were guys from SOC C, there were guys from 4RAR, there were guys from SASR. We all probably knew each other from trade school, or we knew of each other, but we had the bond over there. We didn't have a chance to do it because we didn't do pre-deployment. We all just ended up in that one place at that one time.
I did make good friends with one of the guys, Luke, his girlfriend from down
and what about this, mate, for absolute sliding doors, right? So just before I get to that point, this was at the time, right, where we were enabled maybe to have one phone call a week. We didn't have Facebook or Instagram or smartphones, none of that, right? So communication was via email, and emails went, they were DRN emails. So I don't even know if we could send you emails. I don't know. I can't remember.
A phone call.
Phone call.
Very occasionally.
There was a hut set up at Camp Russell, and maybe it had, I don't know, maybe 10 phones, but there were 100 blokes there, perhaps.
Like a prison queue, one in, one out.
100%. Yeah. And so before I guess the hardest thing for Rowie was, and any family, and this went for everyone who was going outside the wire. It was hard enough for any family of someone, people being there, but for those that went out and did a job, you obviously, you were sworn to silence. You couldn't talk about anything to do with what you were going out to do. You couldn't even say that you were going out. All you could say was, honey, I won't be able to call you for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And that's what we used to get used to saying, honey, I'll call you in a couple of weeks. And that's all that Ro could learn about what I was doing at the time. And then when the worst case scenario would happen, which it unfortunately did, that news would hit the media before we were even back at Camp Russell.
You mean someone on that trip was killed?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was actually one of the, there had been a few fatalities earlier before Glen's deployment, but it was one of the most intense periods of time early in the campaign. And the media didn't have any intel, they didn't have any footage, and they just would roll out rubbish and fed it to the public like it was real. And I learned very quickly to have a huge level of distrust in what the media was saying. So I would try not to participate in it, hear it, see it, read it, and just wait until Glen called me, or a mate did, or someone else I knew who was of trust, to say, everything's all right, this is what's happened. They're from this battalion or that company, not this one, it was this area or that, yada, yada. But it's just it's that constant, always on edge, always waiting. But what I will say is we actually got posted back to Melbourne for your for your posting that would come into effect from when you got back. So by the time Glen went on his bigger deployment to Afghanistan, I was back home here in Melbourne around family and friends. So that was a good thing that I could have that constant level of support.
That's amazing to say that, Ro, because I have this complete unawareness of
where you were
of life at the time, Pete. Like
you flew back to Sydney to deploy.
I got no idea. I remember flying around domestically. I can't remember getting to Afghanistan the second time. I have no idea how that occurred. I literally have no memory of it. And then even coming home, the only thing I remember about coming home was you standing at the airport in your green dress. That's the only thing. It wasn't coming home to.
And you came home to Sydney.
It's the old, it sounds really cliche, Pete, but it wasn't ticker tape parades, right? For us at the time, it was just jump on a domestic flight and come home at all sorts of different hours and days, and
not with your crew either.
And you didn't come home together. You just yeah.
I found that when I came back from my trip, you literally just get off the plane at Sydney Airport, walk through customs, and get a cab home.
Yeah, that's what it was.
It's literally just you just walk in, you're just like, oh shit, I'm back now. What do I do now? I'll just get a cab home.
Dude, it was a different army, man.
I had in our situations, because we'd been posted back to Melbourne, I went to Sydney and had booked a hotel.
Yeah.
And we just had like a long weekend in Sydney to sort of reconnect again. It was amazing. It was
It was a bender, I remember that.
Yeah.
But no, that was another trip. There was one funny circumstance. I think it might have been the first trip, maybe, Rowie, where I was in excuse me, I might have been in somewhere like Abu Dhabi, Pete, like, when you stop over somewhere, and I bought Rowie some perfume, but we weren't allowed to tell the girls when we were coming home, and but my credit card triggered the bank to call Rowie and say someone's just used your credit card into the Guardian. So that was a dead giveaway.
right.
Tip for young players. Yeah. But I was just gonna relay this sliding doors thing. So Rowie mentioned her time working at Macca's, right? So and Rowie also used to work at the Henry Barclay pub in Heidelberg, pouring beers.
Oh, that was after McDonald's.
Yeah, after Macca's.
And
that's when I knew I was going to marry her, Pete, when I could see the sort of beer that she could pour. And she used to leave the members area open for me. I'd get a train down from Latchford and get in after the members was closed, and Rowie would leave one tap on, and I'd sit there in the members bar just watching the footy, pouring my own beers, thinking, I'm marrying this woman.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, mate, 100%. Anyway, there was another girl there called Nick, and Callie, and Nick Callie and Rowie are still best mates, right? And BFFs. Anyway, I'm over I don't know if I knew Stu before this or we figured it out, but won't go through the full story. We're in Afghanistan with Bravo Company. There was a guy that everyone used to call China, and anyone who knows him will know him. Turns out that China's girlfriend at the time was Nick, who Rowie used to pour beers with at the Henry Barclay Hotel, and they're now married. And they're now married, and we're married, and we all go camping together every Christmas.
How good's that?
And this bloke and I were just randomly in Afghanistan in the same company doing the same jobs, and the girls used to pour beers together at a pub in Melbourne.
That's
crazy. Kelly was my maid of honour in our wedding. So the friendship is so solidly based on this shared experience of lifestyle. And Kel worked for after the pub. Nick got into the coppers, and Kelly worked for Jetstar and still does. So she would have her cheap flights and would come and see me in Darwin and Sydney and all places all the time, and loved it. Living the life with me is great.
Yeah.
So, mate, how many trips did you do all up?
So two into Afghanistan, mate. And as we've spoken about, the second was with Bravo Company for RAR, and it's really I have no doubt that trip set the foundations for the business that we now have. There were so many circumstances that occurred during that trip that I've been able to take with me, Pete, not only through business, but in through the early part of my own career. one in particular, and I haven't told this story too often, but it's something that I'm immensely proud of. And it's the old thing, you're sworn to silence for, I don't know, for 5 or 10 years post deployment, you can't sort of talk about things. All that's in the past now, right? So all this stuff can be freely spoken about, and I'm not the only Raimi guy out there that has a story like this. And I'd encourage anyone who served in the core of Raimi that had the privilege of working outside the wire with our special operators and even with our big army, and had a moment in time that was delivered as a pure Raimi soldier. Tell the story, because it's, we need to encourage more young kids to enlist, and these things won't be stories of the past. They'll occur again.
And we need to encourage the kids or the young people in our Defence Force now to stay the course.
Yeah, absolutely. But so, in an interview, people sort of go, "Do you work well under pressure?" And so I remember the first interview I had to get a job when I decided to transition from Army, and the question came up, "Do you work well under pressure?" And
the answer laughing.
I gave, right, I internally, but I was so nervous, mate. And the thing is, it took me years to be able to talk freely about Afghanistan, and it wasn't, and we can go into this another time, but it was years and years and years later I realised that all this had an effect on me. But at the time, mate, when I transitioned from Army, I was only probably less than 6 months out of my last deployment to Afghanistan, and I returned home. So that moment we spoke about earlier with Rowie in the green dress, I'd only returned home from a mission, a patrol outside the wire, maybe 3 days before I arrived back in Australia. So to say, we were wired was an understatement. And so we sort of just personally, I maintained that mindset. Just I left Afghanistan with that mindset. I went to work at 2 Commando Company where I was posted with that same mindset, and I entered the civilian sector with that mindset, and it took me years to understand exactly what that meant. But do you work well under pressure? So and I'll go back to Afghanistan at this point. So I don't know. Look, it felt like about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and we'd been driving all night to that point. We'd set up an FUP I think it was called an FUP, where we'll just sort of pull the vehicles in and face out. And a patrol had gone off to do some recce for a job the next day. So 2 cars went out. So I'd done my rounds. Everything seemed to be in order. And I just rolled out my sleeping mat and sleeping bag, and I'd sort of started to spoon the Unimog tyre, because that's the only way that we could sort of stay warm. And we weren't too far away from the command vehicle, and we had pickets to do that night. They were all arranged. And anyway, it was supposed to be another normal night. And maybe 10 minutes into sort of resting, I'm not kidding, no word of a lie, I heard over the radio, "Pete, you're going to love this, fetch Bluebell." Right? I remember it clearly, fetch Bluebell. And I just went, bang, dinner plates. And I was at the command post, almost warped myself there. So I got on the radio, and one of the vehicles that went out for a recce had a catastrophic failure of the gearbox. And so that was a really easy failure to determine. It was as simple as putting your hand up underneath the car and feeling a big hole in the back of the third differential, and there'd be a gaping hole in there, there'd be oil everywhere, and it was unrecoverable, right? The only thing you just replace the gearbox. That's the only option you have. So the boss, who happens to be the Commander SOCOS now, Garth Gould, he was the OC of that particular trip. He said to me, what do we need to do? And I said, well, you need to get that vehicle back here to the form-up point. The only way you're going to do it is to tow it with the other car. Right. So that's what occurred. And as that was occurring, maybe it was about an hour's tow back to the form-up point. Garth had said to me, what are we going to do? And I said, you've only got 2 options. We replace the gearbox, or you've got to fly the vehicle out. Now, we were on maybe a 2-week job, and we'd only been out for this is all a long time ago, so my memory is pretty bad, but I'm thinking 2, maybe 3 days we'd been out for. And this was the first sort of job or task that we had to do the next day. So everyone was pretty keen to keep the amount of gun cars that we had in the group. And so I said, so Gar said, can you replace the gearbox? And I'm no shit, mate. I'm thinking to myself, this is a moment where I just I either sort of shoot myself in the foot here, or I man up and do the job. And I said, I can do it. He said, how long do you need? And I said, I think I might have said 6 hours, maybe 5 hours. In reality, in a workshop, you're going to take 8 to 12 hours, right? So from memory anyway, Pete, and I might call a bit of stick. My hours might be a bit off, I don't know. But anyway, so we didn't have a gearbox, so we had to get one flown out. So he said, right, get it done, Ferro. So I said, all right. So started preparing my tools. The vehicle came back. It was still dark. The crew were amazing. They were obviously helping me as well. So got onto the car, swinging spanners into the early hours of the morning, dropped the busted gearbox out of the car. We had to use gravity to help us. Obviously, we didn't have any hoists or anything like that. No workshop.
I'm thinking, no hard standing here, no hoist, no
nothing, mate. So
no
I'm lying in bull dust that's that deep. There's thorns in my back that felt like that long. It was pretty intense. And anyway, we got the gearbox out. The Chinook, we could hear it coming in, and that was always flanked by 2 Apache helicopters. We chucked the old gearbox onto the back of a functioning SRV, drove out to the LZ, which was only, I don't know, maybe 80 meters away. So the amount of dust a chopper throws up when it lands in that shit is extraordinary. Everyone's probably seen photos of it. Funny moment occurred, where we backed the SRV up to the Chinook, which is still, going flat out because they're not hanging around, right? The ramp goes down. There's it's a British Chinook. There's a British loadie in the back. A couple of us jump off and carry the gearbox off the SRV. This thing's still pissing oil everywhere, right? It's a mess. And I'm thinking, right, we need to strap this thing down into this helicopter. And so we run onto the back, and I said to the loadie, where do you want us to strap it down, mate? And he goes, just put the fucking thing in and fuck off. So we literally threw it down, ran off the back of the ramp, jumped back into the SRV. We hardly started moving. The ramp was up and this thing was off, right? And but we got the new gearbox off at the same time. Threw that in the back and drove back to our car. So the Chinook disappeared. And then we set about putting the gearbox back in. And so we swung the car back around to use gravity to help us put it back in. I think again, on that chopper was another mechanic, Rads. I think from memory, his name was, I wish I could remember his full name. But anyway, it was a ripping guy, gun mechanic. He came out to give me a hand to put the thing back in and stayed with the trip for the rest of that patrol. So Rads and I are under the car. We're putting as many bolts in as we could just to get the job done. And day had broken. I don't know how long we'd been on the job for this time. And then over the radar, Pete, we heard Allah Akbar, which was, effectively, cry to war for these guys. Because we had ICOM and we could hear everything they were saying. So they knew we were there. All the while, the boss is yelling out, how long, Ferro? And I'm sort of giving myself half an hour increments every time he asks me. And anyway, Allah Akbar comes over the radios, take cover, grab your kit, whatever else was getting yelled. Rads and I are lying under this car. We had our webbing pulled in tight. Our armor was sort of resting next to our webbing just to give us some sort of shield from who knows what was going to occur. Rads and I didn't know what was going to occur. And then I guess they were 105 round shells started landing within, close enough to really put the wind up us, right? We didn't have visual on it.
Sitting duck out here.
Mate,
literally,
it was happening. Anyway, there was a bit of small arms. Our mortars were punching their rounds back. It was all going off. And I took a moment at that point and I said to Rads, just pause for a second, because he and I are still under there with spanners, putting the bell housing back on, right? And literally, mate, the only reason we're still there is because we had to get, we couldn't move this car. So we're swinging spanners, getting the bell housing on. I said to Rads, just pause for a moment. And I think I said something like, how fucking rainy is this? Right. And I remember saying it to him. And we just had we just had a bit of a laugh, mate. And we just kept going. And then, the boys are still punching rounds out and rounds are coming in. I got onto the into the car, started it up, and if anyone's changed the gearboxes, if you let your foot off the clutch and it moves forward, you've done it. But if it doesn't move forward, you haven't put that little bloody clutch push rod in the right place, and you've got to take the whole thing out again and start again. Right? This is a pucker moment, Pete. And anyway, it moved forward. I yelled out at the boss. I said, "We're good," and so I think mount up was the next call. The crew came back, jumped into the car. We jumped on the mothership, and we all drove out of there unscathed. A fast jet came in and finished off the bad guys on the hill. That was fucking spectacular. And anyway, mate, and off we went. We fought out the next 2 weeks of that patrol. That car didn't break down again. We got it back to Tarankout after the patrol, pulled the gearbox out, put it back in properly, and high-fived, and off we went. So yeah, that was a hell of a job. The only thing, just to finish off, mate, the CSM of the company, who unfortunately I believe passed away not too long ago, walked past me once that job was done, or once we were back at Tarankout, and the only thing he said to me was, "Good job, mate." Yeah. Right? That's enough. And you know what, mate? That's all I ever needed to hear. I didn't need to hear anything else. Just "Good job, mate." Right? And that's part of that inclusion and acceptance within the company.
So iconically Australian as well, like no need for cheering or run around. Just good job, mate. Crack on.
Job's done. Move on.
And one of the things I love saying is you got to earn your stories, and you can only earn your stories. You got to be there. That's a classic. This is true. I always, as I was so lucky to be a RAMI officer, and I'm just going to quick shout out to my first ASM, a guy called Pete Skinner. And so Pete, do you know, cross paths with Pete?
I definitely know Pete Skinner. Yeah.
So basically this guy, he, similar to you, did SAS patrols as a vehicle mechanic in Iraq, pushed out and served outside the wire, and, swinging spanners, in contact. I just got to shout this guy out, because I don't think I was that good an officer, but Pete Skinner made me a good officer, because he just covered my back with everything and gave me all the credit for everything. So shout out to Pete.
You would have been a good officer, mate. Don't you worry about that. I have no doubt about that. I wouldn't be talking to you if you weren't.
Hey, look, we're going to do this in 2 parts. I think there's no better moment to end part 1 on the fucking best RAMI war story I've ever heard, especially straight out of the horse's mouth. Fair income, mate. You got to earn your stories, and just give me shivers thinking about it. And I just love that you had the maybe self-awareness just to take a moment, amongst the chaos, and how RAMI is this.
It happened, and it was a real privilege, mate, to be honest. So.
All right, we're gonna break here for pod 1. We're gonna come back and talk about the next chapter. So for anyone who's got to this part of this podcast, the veteran business community is all about fucking great people doing great things in their post-service life. So if you've got an inclination that business might be right for you, if you are interested in starting a business, if you've got a business, the whole point of what we do with VBC is, connect with the community and share with people from common experiences. So get in touch with us at veteranbc.com.